get started by handing this over to Allison Clark and Nicole Lugley, who are with the Land and Acquisition Management Office at DEEP that oversees both programs. But as many of you know, if you are applying, the application has changed this year. This is the open space, both applications. The open space and watershed land acquisition grant application in particular has changed. And that's why we really wanted to make sure that with the application being due September 30th, you have this opportunity to ask your questions. The scoring sheet, as we understand it, is forthcoming. It's not available today for review. So if you have particular questions related to any of the sections and what the scoring could, how the scoring changes might impact those sections, Allison and Nicole are here to answer those as well. So without further ado, I know folks are still filtering in to the room. Again, please keep yourselves muted, and I'm going to turn this over to Nicole to launch us here today.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. So is that good, Amy? Everybody can hear?
Yeah, I can see you great. You're our spotlighted speaker.
Okay. I know I have the window, so hopefully the lighting works. I'm not too dark. Good morning. Thank you. This is a wonderful turnout. So, right, I'm Nicole Lugley. I'm with DEEP, with the Office of Planning and Program Development. Some of you may know me for most of my career. I've been in the planning office, or on the regulatory side, permitting enforcement, strategic planning. Over the past year and a half probably now, I've also, part of our planning office is this land acquisition and management. And so it's a pleasure. This is a wonderful program, and thank you for your interest. The department, the longstanding value of and importance of open space that DEEP recognizes. And as we've done this training for OSWA, I mean, we did it last year. I did do it with Amy and with Allison, and I think in person, maybe we had about 20 people. So this is really amazing. It does show sometimes with Zoom, I think we have about 50 people registered today. So that is fantastic. And I appreciate, we're going to walk through the application and we can answer questions that you have. And if we can't answer some of your questions, then we'll, we need to do some research, or we'll get back to you. So for this year's OSWA 2021 grant round, as Amy has said, the application is due the end of September. We did make some revisions, but the core of the program remains the same, and the values of that. Some of you may be familiar that we did go out before this round for public comments, sent out a survey, and many of you, I'm sure, that are on this call provided comments. And so we do appreciate that. We did take those comments into consideration. They are posted on the DEEP's website, kind of a summary of those comments. And that was also part of the influence of the revisions in the application. So the revisions, when we sent out the public comment, we emphasized 4 areas that we were sort of looking for additional comment. And that had to do with our the accountability and the timeframes, and looking at the eligibility criteria. We also looked at public access, environmental justice and equity, and climate adaptation and mitigation. So taking those 4 and some of the comments, that's sort of where we are in terms of some of the revisions. And one of the biggest changes I think that you'll see this year in terms of revamping, and Allison and I are going to go through this, is the eligibility criteria and the accountability and timeframes piece. And I'll explain that. Some of you may have been on the call last week that the Commissioner Dykes and Deputy Commissioner Mason Trumbull had with the land trusts. We went over that, and some of you had some questions. So one of the things in terms of the eligibility criteria and the timeframes is we want to keep this program as robust as we can in terms of the funding that we have available. And one of the things when we go for the state funding, we don't want to have too many projects we kind of have to demonstrate that we are moving things along. And this helps us, as we know, as we have more state funding, we can fund more of these projects. And then it's a wonderful funding to leverage federal funding. So that's kind of some of the impetus. So when people were saying, that answers that question. So I'll run through, Allison's going to jump in, but I'm going to run through right now, getting into the application to explain to you the eligibility criteria. So in the application, we always have that box, right? So that we talked about that kind of emphasizes what we're looking at. And one of the things this year that you'll see is that we're talking about having, for eligibility, it's only one grant application per applicant that's going to be considered.
Nicole, I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 sec. Do you want me to start sharing the application now so you can just run through it, have it up on the screen so you can show things as you go along, describe things as you go along? Would you like me to do that now?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. And while I'm queuing that up, we did have a poll that I admittedly forgot to introduce at the very beginning of the meeting, just trying to get a sense of who is here for which program. We just want to make sure that we provide enough time for those that are interested in the Urban Green and Community Garden program. And while we're running that, I'm going to get the application up.
Yeah, one of the things that having all of the, with everybody on, it's not, when we had the training last year, it was having a sense of, I don't know, Amy, if you were asking this, how many people have actually applied to the program before and are familiar with the program and have had training as opposed to this being new? Because I mean, the application really hasn't changed that much in terms of what you need to in filling it out. It really is kind of some of this eligibility criteria. So as Amy's putting that up again, kind of these threshold comments for you are kind of, like I said, the accountability, but public access, sort of refining kind of the information that you give. For climate, since last year, the difference is we've had the whole GC3 initiative. And we are looking at that and looking at some of the reports and what came out of those committees and the recommendations. And many of you are involved in that. And as you know, we're not siloed. So some of those recommendations from GC3 are very important in terms of influencing the open space program and the OSWA grant application process. So I think many of you would be pleased with that because you participated, and that's what we're seeing here in terms of the climate. Okay, so thanks, Amy. So, I mean, I am not going to you can look at the application. I'm not going to run through this word for word. Everybody can, you can read through this. I'm going to highlight, as I said, the eligibility criteria is we're looking at one grant application per applicant considered. And I was explaining that to you, that really goes to kind of the equity and that people, in terms of this, we want to move things and be able to have the funding move and make it available. So to fund as many projects as possible. And that also goes along with, we have said this time in terms of we're looking at, past compliance and looking at compliance. So a big emphasis this year is if you had an OSWA project prior to 2018, you shouldn't apply until that project is completed or grant funds are turned back or rescinded. So that's a change, but it's okay. I mean, it's great because we've heard from a lot of people already that have realized that they've had some things that are outstanding, and we're working with them on that. So we understand their circumstances. We understand that land use is not necessarily cut and dry, and there may be a fact pattern, but we're willing to work with you. Allison has been working, we've had follow-up meetings with a couple of people that had some outstanding projects, and we've been working with them. So another emphasis in terms of timeframes, that will be section 11, and this box refers to that. But this is just a heads up to you. We really are, when you accept, if you are awarded a grant, we are looking that you will, we are focused on a 2-year completion date. And what's changed, it's not changed, but we're clearer now when we award the grant that there are, we break down the timeframes, there's targets and milestones to try to keep it moving. So we understand this is a two-way street, that, deep, as we know, it's a capacity issue for us. We understand that we've got to move along, but at the same time that we want the grant applicants, if you're awarded a grant, you move along as well. And we're in contact because, again, we need to show, demonstrate, as we want to keep funding these projects, that we move along and then we complete them, and then we can get other people in the queue to get that opportunity. Let's see. So the other ones I wanted to highlight, that in terms of the compliance piece, we do want to show evidence of, when you're applying, that you show evidence of past compliance with if you've been awarded through the OSWA program, we want to know that you've demonstrate past compliance with those projects. I know it was always an emphasis on the past compliance with public access, but in general, anything that you're that goes to kind of wrapping up the projects. So Allison, kick it to you. You had wanted to run through the eligibility criteria. I had just wanted to do some of the kind of ones that were a little bit different this year and emphasize those. So Amy, we're just having questions in the chat as we run along. Is that how we're doing this?
Yeah, I'm kind of monitoring those, and I think what would be, why don't we pause every so often and read through the questions in the chat? They might not follow along exactly, to your presentation or to your comments, but let's just, rather than lose the opportunity to get to them, we'll pause every few minutes. So go ahead, Allison, and why don't you stop after the eligibility section? Then we'll go to the questions in the chat. We'll take some of those and then head back in.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
So, hi everyone, I'm Allison. I probably know most of you over the years. I've been here for about 14 years. I've closed on up to maybe 200 properties with all of you, and preserved over 10,000 acres. So it's a pleasure to see you. A lot of you probably know this comes as second nature, but for those who don't, we'll just go through the application, the major points here. For eligibility, hopefully you're a land trust, a municipality, or a water company. Your town or municipality or town has a plan of conservation and development that's less than 10 years old. If you're purchasing Watershed property, you have a letter from PURA granting its disposal. The property must be retained in its scenic open space condition. I don't know, that goes to a lot of questions lately as to solar and whatnot, but currently, the property has to be maintained as its open space condition per statute. So we don't participate in solar clearing or any of that. Trees, everything else has to stay the way it is. So that, I think that was one question. Each applicant, again, must prove that they've have public access on all of their previously funded acquisitions. That sort of began last time for the 2020 applications. Many of you know that, we even kind of followed up in some cases with you saying that, maybe your signs weren't up to par. If you have paper signs, printed and posted in kiosks, just going forward, as a heads up, we do require real permanent signs and plaques now on all of the OSWA properties. So if you didn't get that memo last year, bear that in mind going forward. We do want to see permanent signs on your properties with the signs too, and the sole public access compliance. You should have one sign on every property. If you have multiple properties that are adjacent to each other, Perhaps that property that has road frontage should have one sign. And then as you go into the property and you cross into the next property, there should be another sign acknowledging DEEP's funding on that property as you go through. We did call a couple people out on that last year as well. Anyway, all of the properties cannot be committed to public use. This is coming up more and more often now. There can't be an existing conservation easement on the property. Please don't record a conservation easement even after you purchase it. That happened once this year, where maybe there was a prior subdivision on the property and the town had committed a portion of that space to open space, and then they came in and wanted to purchase it. And so it was already committed to public use. That's not something we want to, be involved in if it's already public use. If it's contaminated, please have some sort of plan. Say, oh, well, there is contamination, but we have a plan in place, we have money in place, and you should be able to demonstrate that you can address that contamination within 1 to 2 years, because we want you to close in 1 to 2 years. So hopefully, preferably no contamination, but if there is, you should address it. I think that's it for eligibility.
Okay, I just sent everyone a reminder to go ahead and post their questions in the chat. I will go to the ones that we do have. There are a couple, and actually, one did deal with remediation. She said it might be a bit off topic, but you just ended that section talking about remediation. So wondering, and again, not spending too much time on this, but and this did come up last week as well, if there are funding sources for remediation of desirable open space, perhaps that's something, that information you could provide to us, and we can share that out. But if you can just talk about remediation just slightly, or just talk about it briefly with respect to the OSWA program.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that question. And I appreciate that Allison just actually touched on it, because last week when the commissioner, when we were talking with the land trusts, the commissioner, we did make the connection, as we're saying, as we have more emphasis on, we're talking about environmental justice and equity and potentially in distressed communities, then you may think, well, yes, it could be that you end up having sites that need to be remediated, and that point comes out. So that's what Allison was saying, that if you can then in your application talk about, what would the plan be, of course, then you start thinking, okay, what you have to balance there is at the same time, we're saying we want these done within 2 years, and sometimes with remediation, may take longer. So that, nothing is carved in stone. We have to, we're going to rank proposals, and as much as this is a science, it's an art as well in terms of understanding the fact patterns. In terms of funding available, I think that is something that came up last week, and it's not off topic. It's definitely something we'll look into more to be able to point out what those resources are. Off the top of my head, I say Department of DECD, Economic Community Development, for the other state agencies. Now, I know they have some funding for remediation, but I don't know, I need to get more familiar with exactly what that criteria is, but we can, look into that.
Yeah, so, I think definitely, as we talked about last week, for those of you that are also maybe purchasing land that has some historic use as a farm, and there might be some concern about some agriculturally related contamination, that was a very relevant question. So I'm glad it was asked. Thank you, Jennifer. Another question here says, does DEEP have land acquisition people who deal directly with landowners to acquire property?
Yeah, we do. So another half of our program, so in terms of the statute for open space, one half is this competitive open space program. Maybe we kind of jumped right into this, right, as opposed to explaining that, as we were saying, that's available to land trusts and municipalities and water companies, like Amy was saying. But the other half it's the recreation and natural heritage, that program, which is focused on deep acquisition of open space. So we do also have another property agent. So Allison Clark is property agent, and she's focusing on the more this competitive grant program for open space. And then we have Matt Starr, that some of you may have worked with, that he's a property agent. He kind of takes the lead on DEEP's land acquisition. And it's similar to what we do with OSWA. It's like our priorities, how strategically we look at things. for our acquisition, it's driven by some of our planning documents, right? So we've got our green plan, and it's driven, for OSWA, you look at your conservation development plan. For us, we look at, is it properties that can be adjacent to, a current wildlife management area or one of our parks or our forestry. So I don't know if that answers the question in terms of, do we have a separate arm? There's separate authority.
So I will say there was another question that went to, somebody was looking for the frequently asked question sheet.
Oh,
so
right.
I am going to take you back to the homepage for the OSWA program. But there is also a homepage for the open space in general, and that also talks about the Rec and Natural Heritage Trust program at DEEP. So if you're looking for more information for that, it's available through the DEEP website as well. But the FAQ, and I believe that one of our staff had put the link directly into the chat.
Right. So
thanks,
Amy. So the FAQ, right, we did say in the application that it was attached, and then we didn't attach it. And one of the things I have to say, Allison and I talk about that the FAQ, some pieces may be a little outdated because the application is a little revised this year, but most of it is tried and true.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question, I am going to scoot right back to the application too. So if any of these questions, Allison and Nicole, it would be helpful for me to jump to the section. Please cue me there. The next question says, our land trust is located in a town that has a relatively high amount of land in dedicated open space. We have received 3 grants to date. Would we still be considered eligible compared to other less represented towns?
Everybody's eligible.
Right, everybody's eligible. All we've said is only in this round, like 1 grant application per applicant, but we're not saying that because you've received funding previously that we're comparing. I think that's the question, right? That we would judge that you've gotten grants before from us as opposed to someone new coming forward. That's, we're evaluating the application on its face is how it comes in. And we're ranking them according to the other applications. I mean, that was something that's also, I meant to say in my intro, in that box on the application. I mean, we do talk about that the awards, the awards will be made based on available funding. We are going to be ranking them, as Amy said, we're going to be, we'll be issuing that scoring sheet again, but basically it's, we rank the proposals and the categories are, similar to what we were talking about with the, we went out with the public categories that I talked about, like, do you meet the administrative criteria? We're looking at public access, we're looking at climate, natural resources, and in terms of the equity piece.
Thanks, Nicole. And again, just cue me when you want me to go to a certain section of the application. I'm happy to do that. And similarly, I put that out there to all of you. When you have a question, if you're looking at the application and you have a question about a particular section, just let me know, put it in the chat and we'll jump right to that section. This next question asked about the FAQ site noted also apply to the Urban Green and Community Garden Initiative, or is there a separate site for that program? We'll cover that later, but I can just quickly show you on the homepage here again for open space. If you click on the Urban Green and Community Garden Program, it will take you to a separate page about that program and to the application itself, as well as some other information. But correct me if I'm wrong, Allison and Nicole, but I believe that FAQ or this answer applies to both programs because it does set forth the list of the towns that are eligible for the Urban Green and Community Garden Program in that document. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks for that question as well. All right. We'll take a couple more here. The questions are the most important part of this session today, so please keep them coming. Here's another one. Any restrictions on OSWA funds for acquisition related expenses, specifically on cleanup?
Expenses? I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think
expenses. Any
expenses, right? I think there's a section. I mean, Allison probably knows exactly more where we talk about that. We don't, we don't reimburse for the survey, for the appraisal, right? There's that piece, right? Yeah. But is this question specifically asking about would we provide funding for remediation? Is that I don't know how often that's actually come up because most of the time people come to us, they don't have sites that need to be remediated, or I don't think people have asked us for the funding. Is that what the question?
Well, I think it goes to, and we can ask Jean later to qualify it, but I think folks are interested in whether or not they can wrap up transaction-related expenses into their grant request. And the answer is no, correct?
Right, no.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next question is, will DEEP cap awards like last year or spread the wealth across the state so that each region will get 1 or 2 awards only?
Okay, thank you for that question. Oh yeah, Paul. That was something, when we went out with the public comments, it was interesting, the response that we got on that. So it was almost as if people wanted one or the other. So, well, there's 3 components to your question, really. So last year we ended up having, not only did we rank the proposals, and so when we rank the proposals, it's always as if, well, is it, there's a sliding scale of, is it, 55% funded, 45%, 30, or whatever the percentage is, right? So we did that. And then in addition to that, we had a cap. And so when we went out with public comment, there was feedback, it's sort of like, well, why isn't it, it's one or the other, not both. I don't have a definitive answer right now. I think part of it depends on, how many applications we get in, how much funding is available at the time, we're awarding. In terms of the second part of the question, will spreading the wealth across each region gets 1 or 2 awards only? Previously, when we did, it hasn't been, it's really been how you end up ranking. And I think that because now we're going to be emphasizing, and we'll talk about that in terms of really the scoring with the equity, how you kind of divvy up scoring between emphasis on natural resources, and then if it's kind of a distressed area close to transportation, some of those, how that scoring, it may kind of balance that out. But we don't, we have not consciously said, oh, okay, we're only going to pick one from this region and one from another. It's just sort of fallen out just based on the scoring and how they got ranked. I don't know if that answers the question.
Again, I will put it out there to those that do ask these questions. If they would like some follow-up, just go ahead and throw that into the chat and we'll get to it. Let's just, we'll keep going and absolutely, but thank you for that, Nicole. Next question here. How detailed would recreation areas need to be given that the land is still likely privately owned, so can't go in and start to clear old colonial farm arterial roads to really see the infrastructure before closing? Should just a likely access trailhead be declared?
Right. I mean, there isn't an expectation. When we say detailed, you have to have some idea of, that you're open to, that you would want to try to put trails in. As Allison was saying, that you're going to be able to, you'll put a public access sign. Maybe if you are trying to put a parking area, if you offer, I mean, we're not saying you have to, but, if it's something that's a possibility, that's, who knows, maybe your proposal would be ranked higher. We certainly recognize that, maybe you can't get onto the property yet if it's still privately owned to see the infrastructure. We understand that.
Thank you. And maybe we can jump to that section after a few more questions, or at least get to that section at some point that talks about access, because a lot of questions come up about access and also use for passive recreation as well. What does that really mean? But let's keep going. We still have folks filtering in here, which is terrific. Here's the next question. I'm just going right in order here. In the past, DEEP has tried to divvy up the available funds such that all eligible applications receive at least something. Is that still the case? And I think, Nicole, you touched on that, but maybe answer that one directly. Right.
I mean, I do. I really appreciate that question. And that's not even just this year. We started the last couple of years, I'm sure, to say that this program is getting more competitive based on, especially as, well, 2 things, as the demand in the program increases, which is wonderful, right? But then it becomes more competitive. And then potentially as if funding gets tighter, but that's why we want to really, again, the accountability point I mentioned, then we can move projects along. So we have been saying the last several years that it would be more competitive. And like I said, and what we've always been able to do, as you said, is we usually end up funding everybody to some degree. That's what we've done, but it's sort of an evolution. We may not be able to do that. And that's what we're saying. And we're saying but if you don't get funded, it's getting more competitive, you just maybe can come back next year. I mean, but that's all going to depend on, again, how many applications we get and how much funding is available.
Thank you, Nicole.
Sure.
The next question actually dovetails well with what I had just mentioned before. And maybe, Allison, if you can cue me to the right section while I read this question, it talks about access. Can you talk a bit about what you would like to see for accessibility access, specifically for quote raw undeveloped land to be added to currently conserved land? So the section on public access.
Well,
there's two. So Allison, so one thing I want to say, everybody should realize, and I realize the way we kind of drafted this application this year, section 2 of the application, it kind of got lumped together. We've got climate change, conservation, and recreation value. And I mean, now maybe next time I do this a little differently, but we sort of, some of the passive recreational uses in the public access piece, there's some elements in that section, in addition to kind of the traditional public access section of the application, which is section 6. So those would be two sections I would look closely at in terms of when you're looking at the, like you were just saying, Amy, passive recreational uses
and also section 7 on accessibility.
Absolutely. Right? And then section 7, we kept that separate, accessibility for people with disabilities.
So Greg, who asked this question, perhaps if you, beyond, looking at these sections, if you have a more specific question, please post that in. But he was just, was wondering what you would like to see at DEEP for accessibility when the application is coming in for raw undeveloped land. And this kind of goes to what Dennis was asking, how much detail are you expecting when they don't own the property yet and they're putting an application in? How much planning in advance are you looking for when they submit this application?
Right.
One thing thought I have is, obviously you're working hopefully with a willing seller. So I would hope that the willing seller is going to give access to the property. We asked the question, is there a letter of intent? Is there a purchase and sale agreement? I would hope that they would therefore allow access to the property, so you could certainly determine what the public recreational uses and all of the resources that you want to highlight on the property are in your application. You have to give access to the property to the appraiser, surveyor. All these people do require access, so hopefully you can work within those parameters.
Thanks, Allison. Next question here. Once the applications are submitted, can applications be viewed by the public?
No.
Okay.
Can they be viewed by
maybe
the public?
after the property is purchased? Right now, if I get a FOIA on an appraisal or on any property that has not yet closed, it's private. After the property closes, you can certainly give me a FOIA and I can give you any of the information once it closes.
Thank you. Next question here is regarding existing conservation easements on properties for the DEEP application. A lot of times permitted and approved subdivisions have conservation easements that are contingent upon the development of the property, but they don't offer the public access trails and natural resource conservation that the DEEP easement would provide. And many times they're on a very small portion of the larger property. I would expect that the extinguishment of these proposed small open space areas prior to the DEEP easement would be acceptable. I guess that's the question. That's a lot there.
That is a lot. So honor Lawler. So honor, I guess this is going to, is this, are you trying to get at what Allison was just describing, what we've had this issue that,
they can release it. If the town releases that conservation easement so that our easement has priority and the only easement, we could then go forward.
Yeah, that was my point. And Excuse me, I should have clarified that. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Honor.
thanks, Honor. Okay.
Okay, and the next question here from Madeline. And I just scrolled up, Madeline, here. In the important notice box at the top of the application, the second to last bullet says all land acquired must be accessible to the public without limitation. Please clarify exactly what this means. Thank you. We assume that areas of habitat concern, etc., can be off limits to hikers, etc., as in the past. So this is the second to last bullet here that question relates.
Correct. I think that, again, it's always the fact pattern of each case. So with your application, and that came out with people in the public comments too this time on this app. We're talking about public access, but we do want to, like we're saying, it depends on the site, that there may be something with habitat concern, that there's some areas that we need to consider. Now, I don't recall whether that point in this box, it was saying without limitation is new, or if that's just leftover language. But I think, Madeline, the interpretation that you're saying that is has not changed in terms of looking at the natural resources is appropriate on a particular site.
And what we could do is, if we have some time, we can go down to section 6, Madeline, which it refers to here. And then if you have questions related to section 6, I would encourage you to put those in the chat as well. The next question is there any chance that the deadline will be extended this year?
No, we don't need to extend the deadline. I mean, unless.
No.
We
I think
also,
we extended it
only
last
because we
year
were
because
so-
of COVID.
Excuse me. We
You know, last year we gave people an extension because of appraisers and people not able to get into town halls. It was kind of, you know, a one-up. We don't anticipate extending it again. Everybody's back in the town halls and open for business, so.
Right, and we also, you know, we were later announcing the grant round just because of kind of getting clearance to do that. And then we went out with the public comment. So the revisions to the application kind of put us, and I know that people want to try to be back on this regular annual schedule. That's our goal.
Yeah.
So that's our predictability, right? I mean, when we talk about the transparency and the predictability and that consistency for everybody. So, you know, like I say, we understand you're trying to get leverage and matching funds for a lot of these projects. We understand that it's challenging. If we don't have enough money, you know, for your projects, you don't know what you're going to get, and then you're going to need to raise more money. So we're very conscious of that and trying to get on a steady schedule for all of you.
okay, thank you. And this is more of a comment and maybe just something you can take a look at rather than doing it now. There's a comment here that says there may be 2 different application forms online. The 4-page application that I printed out this morning has not important notice box at the top, doesn't have that on the top. It might be refreshing the browser, I don't know, but it's something just for you to take a look at it deep to make sure that
Well, thank you. I hope there's not 2 applications online. So we will definitely look at that. Thank you, Meg.
Yeah, thanks for
that.
pointing that out. Okay, next question from Deb Simon here. During the review process, is consideration made for review of the proposed land use for its impact on state endangered, threatened, or species of special concern?
Yes, absolutely. And that's in definitely, like it's bolded in, so that's in section 2, that climate change, conservation, recreation value, that protect a habit, you know, when we're talking about, will the proposed property protect a habitat of a plant or animal species that is either threatened or endangered or of special concern? And then, you know, it's referencing to look at the NDDB. So yes, and that kind of goes along with what you're saying in terms of, well, public access. Do we consider whether there's something of special concern? And, you know, of course we do. It's this balance.
Thank you. Maria has a question about a very specific property and whether it would qualify for the program. I'm going to just skip that, and Maria, we will get to your question, but we're going to push it down towards the end just so that we can get to some of the more specific questions about the application itself for those that are applying. But we'll definitely flag your question. It's a longer fact pattern, and I want to make sure that we get to it at the end. Here's the next question: looks like this grant round does not require 2 yellow books, but 1 yellow book in the review. True?
Yeah.
That's a big, I know Allison was going to go into that when do you want to get into, that's I think a lot of people will be happy about that, this in terms of efficiency this round.
Great, thank you. Next question, going forward after this grant round, oops, my cursor just jumped. Going forward after this grant round, what do you expect to be your grant scheduled deadline? What do you expect your grant scheduled deadline to be?
Let's see. So, someone had asked, even the commissioner last week, when do we expect to, award these grants and, announce the next round? Typically, we try to announce the grant round kind of earlier in the year, so whether it's in like a February or a March. I mean, I think this year we got into May. So that's our goal, to get it kind of announced earlier in the year. So February or March.
Okay. Yeah, and the more traditionally, it was the new grant award, or the new round was announced again at the end of September or thereabouts, right? And then the awards were announced for the previous round at the end of the year, maybe sometimes spilling over into January. But this year, definitely, for a lot of the reasons you've articulated, things changed a lot. So I think we're all hoping that for that regularity again, it certainly helps with the planning. Meg just acknowledged the fact that she had been looking at the Urban Green and Community Garden Grant application. So that's the 4-pager she was looking at. So
no, okay. Thank you.
We're good
Thanks,
there.
Meg.
Okay, next one. Our BDR, or baseline documentation report, contractor has told us that NDDB property specific information requests are backlogged for 6 months. Is that still true? Thank you. And for those that don't know, it's the natural NDDB natural database, natural diversity database. Yeah. Is that, do you know anything about that?
I don't believe it's, my understanding hasn't been that it's backlogged for 6 months. I mean, I also, because with the department, in the planning office, we also have the concierge service for permit assistance, and, we do the pre-application meetings, permit assistance, and many of the permits, when people come into our agency, they need to have those NDDB reviews. I wasn't aware that it's that much of a backlog. But you definitely should, on your property, well, it's, right, we're already in August. And if you are already thinking, I would think that if you were going to be applying by the end of September, you already were thinking of your property, hopefully. So if that's the issue, that you're having a difficulty with NDDB, I guess
maybe they could reach out to me and I could put in a good word.
Right. I know, it's just unfortunate. I would hope if you had that, you needed to look, and if there was a hit on NDDB and you needed to get something for our agency, I would have hoped that you weren't waiting until right now and only give yourself a month. But that's a very short timing.
Yeah, and there was a response in here, or a comment from Shelley, who indicated that she hasn't had that problem. So maybe, Madeline, it might be something to follow up on with Allison, as she suggested. So it might just be a time, it was just bad luck with some timing there, and that Allison can help you there. And also, we did put Christina put the link to the NDDB into the chat for those of you that might not be familiar with this source of really important information for your properties when you're evaluating them for specific species.
Right. And just, so the natural diversity database and that program, like I said, I mean, I know for our permits, they try to be timely, but we do tell permit applicants, for instance, when they go in for pre-application meetings, that you need to plan, but 6 months usually it's not that long. But also there's something that the department's working on a database that will, when that's released, it will make some of that move faster. So that, to look forward to that.
I've seen a lot of applications too in the past where they just go to the NDDB website and you can go to the location and they show a little blob of, where there is something, if it's on your property. A lot of people just print those out, and I'll accept those in the application, as proof that there is some NDDB, matter there based upon that little blob on your property.
Okay, that's helpful, Allison. So we're not waiting for, the nomenclatures, there's an NDDB determination letter. That's what you would need for.
You could certainly do it on your own.
Okay. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it looks like, at least from my perspective, we have no additional questions. So I would throw it back out to you, Allison and Nicole, if you want to highlight some of the other changes in the application for folks that are applying this year. And then maybe we can get to Maria's question. She had a longer question. And then we can segue over to the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. But meanwhile, folks, please continue to put your questions in to the chat. And we will circle back and no matter which program you're interested in, we'll make sure that we ask them within the time allotted here.
Okay, thank you. Do you want us to go to the public access, or we can just kind of keep rolling? Because there's some things I think Allison would want to get to in terms of.
I would leave it to you, it said there are a few
I
questions.
guess I just have a couple general comments.
Sure.
It is important that you be able to demonstrate the public access. Obviously, at the beginning of the application says if you can't, you will not be awarded a grant. That being said, you do me a world of good if you could just keep it very simple, like one property. Say you have 5 previously awarded grants, 1 property per page. Ideally, you're going to have a location map showing, the property frontage on a public street, where your parking area is, if applicable, where your public access funding acknowledgement sign is located, where your trails are. Again, in some cases, if the property does not have frontage on a public street, it has to be located adjacent to another property that's already owned by the land trust that has frontage on a public street. So there has to be some way, to show and prove that you're going to get public access on future properties and that you have it on your previously funded properties. So there's 2 sections. I'm sorry, not explaining this well. Previously funded, show a map, your existing signs, public access trails, parking if you have it, and then your future property, this application, the same thing. It needs to be clearly demonstrated. Last time I did have a couple applications that were, I won't name names or anything, but there was a couple that were really confusing for me. It would be like, okay, here's the Smith property. The sign, although, is on the Jones property. And then when I would read the Jones property write-up, it would say the sign's on the Clark property. So the sign for that property, again, needs to be on that property, not somewhere else, unless it's the only way for you to access this particular property that you're talking about. As you can see by the current application, the funding, the public access, we now encourage that you use social media, your website, your social media outlets. Right now, that's, also a plus. We love to see how you're going to promote it, especially in times of COVID when people are really looking for that on the internet. That's a big plus if you can do that. Maybe another just word to the wise. If you say, you're going to have public access and a sign on Main Street and the parking area there, make sure that, you know that when you apply in a couple years, we're going to look back to that application when we're evaluating future applications to say, did they put that sign on Main Street? Did they put that parking lot there? Because now we're going to use that to, score your future grant applications. I had to go back to a few people last year that, said they had a trail going up to the summit and they had a parking area and they had this and that, but they didn't. At the end of the day, their application said clearly they didn't have all that. So we have to now make them do that in order for us to actually fund any future projects. So word to the wise, if you say it's going to be there, you're going to be held accountable to that in the future. I mean, a lot of people do an amazing job here, trails and signs and, a lot of ADA accessibility things. Those are all great assets. It's just unfortunate that maybe, some people, if we go to the property and their trails are overgrown and you can't even get inside of them, we want those people to be accountable.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Allison. So that's, yeah, so that's,
Oh, can I ask everybody to make sure you're muted there? There's some background noise. Thank you.
thanks. So Allison, right. So Allison's highlighting, like if you have a current proposal that comes in, it's that section 6. Like I said, section 2 picks up some of the pieces of, having you provide for high quality passive recreational use and describe your plans. But then it's section 6 for the current applications. And this is where some of the public comments that we received. That's why we have the heading public access / recreational resources and public outreach. Some of the suggestions we got, like Allison said, is, can the applicant on the website, can they clearly post maps and information about the property? And also in your proposal, what's your plan for communicating that this open space is available? So you can just kind of highlight that. In the past, you might just say, I'm going to provide public access, I'm going to have a trail. But now it's like, how are we going to, get the word out? Because before we would emphasize the map. So that's an area where we've enhanced the application. And then again, section 7 talks about accessibility for people with disabilities, and then how, how accessibility is to be integrated into the design of the project. And then, if you can't provide this sort of accessibility for people with disabilities, to explain why. Maybe there's something in particular about the site. And then the other section that Allison was talking about is that section 13. So the past grant compliance. And I said, and in the past, it's really been this emphasis on public access. So that's what Allison was saying, to make her life a little easier, like how do you review it? But that really is important in terms of how we would be, encouraging compliance, because now we'll weed people out from being eligible. So it's very important to be clear about how you show that your projects, if they're closed, what accessibility and public access
We love pictures too.
Yeah.
Pictures tell 1,000 words.
Okay, thank you. There are a few more questions filtering in, but again, please, from all of our participants, if there's a specific section you're interested in, you could put that in the chat, and Allison and Nicole also,
Okay.
if there's sections you want to highlight, please.
All right, so I'm going to go back, like in terms of kind of this theme. So we've talked about public access, and I feel like, so in terms of kind of when we went out with those public comments, I said we emphasized sort of the accountability, eligibility. I feel like we've gone through that. We've gone through the public access, kind of the enhancements, and then really that's the emphasis to tie in with past compliance. So section 2, which is a lot. I mean, you'll see in the scoring sheet, we always really broke stuff down. I mean, you still should break things down. Climate change, conservation, and recreation value. And we've sort of truncated everything together, but it's still this idea of, recreational value is, are you linking to a existing greenway? That's something you should emphasize. But in terms of the natural resource protection, I mean, that's still very strong in this program. And the connection, as I said, now that we've had GC3, the Governor's Council on Climate Change, and we have recommendations from those reports, I would, if I were you, take a look at the near-term report that came out in January and the recommendations in that GC3 report, and use some of those recommendations. You can highlight how your project, how you're picking up on some of those. I mean, so, because we have, for instance, in section 2, we say does it provide a valuable resource for, it's like for forestry, for fishing, for wildlife habitat, other natural resources. Will it preserve high quality natural waters and drinking water resources? I do know the working natural lands, for GC3, those committees that you had the separate, you had a forestry committee, you had, so there was rivers, right? What were the other, there was wetlands.
Ag and soils.
Right. So, so we do talk about the habitats that are at risk from climate change, and that's the adaptation. So we, in this, again, it's kind of the whole laundry list that's in this application, but we say from risk, what's at risk from climate change, including forested swamps, lands adjacent to fresh water and tidal wetlands, core forest, riparian lands adjacent to cold water streams, beaches and dunes, Areas of potential tidal marsh migration. I mean, we know that is kind of an emerging area when we look at adaptation in terms of protection. Protect natural lands with high carbon storage, sequestration value. I mentioned that before, such as core forests and wetlands. That's important. I mean, I feel like that's a core part of this program. It always has been and continues to be. And now with the added focus, the lens of climate.
I started to, actually, I forgot I was sharing my screen and started to get some links for you, but we'll make sure I came back to the application, but we'll put some links into the chat before we end today on the GC3 working group reports, as well as a link to the phase 1 report as well. It's
right.
Stuff to look at whether or not you're planning to submit an application for sure. Pete had asked, when will this grant round approval be announced? And I actually couldn't remember if you had mentioned that either. So glad you asked the question, Pete.
We haven't mentioned it. I don't even know if the commissioner I'm sure that question was asked last week when we were, we'll get the applications in the end of September, or I should explain the process. We get them in the end of September. We have an internal committee, of experts that will get our own internal. So if it's forestry expertise and wildlife expert, to look at these water quality. So we have to do our internal review. So it's still, we're looking towards the beginning of the year. I mean, because usually we give ourselves, 4 months, 4 to 6 months, right? So
one of the things that has always held us up in the past has been the appraisals. We've had limited staff. When we get like 35 applications, there's upwards of 70 appraisals to review. That's one of the reasons we changed it this year to ask for the yellow book appraisal and the review, because we just don't have the staff to review your appraisals. And hopefully this will cut down on the review time as well, because we're kind of making the land trust, we're putting it on you to get that appraisal review. Because when we, especially if there's federal funding, we have to share the appraisal and the review with the federal, funding sources. And we just don't have the staff to do it. So I'm hoping that that'll cut it down a little bit. We don't have to do all those appraisal reviews. We'll still look all of the appraisals over and make sure that, everything is on the up and up, but we don't have to prepare these long typed reports or anything like that, which will save us time.
Thank you, Allison. So there are now a number of questions that have come in. I'm going to rattle them off, but just being cognizant of the time, and for those folks that are here for the Urban Green and Community Garden Program, I think we'll cut off the Q&A for OSWA at 1:35. Which is about 4 minutes from now. So keeping that in mind with responses, I'm going to run through these questions as best as I can, but I would encourage you to, reach out to Allison directly and Nicole as well. If questions today haven't been answered or you have additional follow-up that you'd like, but this is a good time to do this while you still have plenty of time in advance of the application being due.
Okay. And then one thing, so Amy, thank you. And before you just get into all the questions, I haven't been looking myself. So one section, I do call your attention to section 8, which in the application, which is environmental justice and equity. And in the prior application, we probably called this more community impact. So some of the information in here, we kind of changed the heading. Right. So, but it is, is the property located within or in close proximity to an urban area or population area, either as a small lot or a large open space parcel? So it's just asking that question, and is it accessible by public transportation? How does it connect to it? And is this an area where there is significant growth, or is it planned? So that's, again, I think that some of these questions were there before. And then external support, we've talked about this before. Allison, you can probably get into this. It's only really kind of one letter. We said one letter of support from each type of entity. We don't need so many, because that's another thing that kind of bogs us down. We talked, that was new last year. And
well, I mean, if you think about it, you've got your Conservation Commission, your Planning and Zoning, and then a regional planning agency. If you provide 5 letters from your Conservation Commission members, you're still only going to get 10 points to check that box. You only need one letter. Save yourself the effort. Just get one letter. There's no need for 5 because you're only going to get so many points when you check that box anyway. So that's why we're saying just one letter.
So under external support, I mean, we do say one of the questions is this acquisition currently being considered as a location for multifamily or affordable housing? If so, please explain any details and include letters of support from local environmental justice and equity organizations. And then how and when was the decision to purchase the property made? What kind of interests has the community expressed in the acquisition? And then it's the letters of support. So just want to draw your attention to that portion of the application. Okay, thanks, Amy.
Sure. Yep. And I'm going to scoot through the rest of these. We've got just a couple of minutes, well, like a minute left. But regarding linkage to existing greenways, do these need to be adjacent or nearby or both? And the next question from Joanne is, how does one determine sequestration? So one regarding linkage, this goes back to that section we were looking at before.
Okay.
So either of you want to take that on regarding linkage to existing greenways? Do these need to be adjacent or nearby or both? And how does one determine sequestration?
Well, I think the greenways it's it adds to application. I mean, if it happens to be something that's near a greenway and you can kind of point that out, and if the map, then that, maybe that will help with your scoring, but it's certainly not something that it has to be. That's
The more the better.
right.
The more adjacent open space, the better.
And what about information on sequestration?
Well, the sequestration, I know that was something with GC3 that we knew that in some, we have that in about sequestration, but it's not as if we're all there yet with the science, with exactly figuring that out. I think, Amy, that came up with GC3 as too, right? There was some Clark University, like some report or something that was supposed to come out with some calculations, but maybe there's some, I'm sure there's kind of rough estimates that maybe people, if that was some information that they wanted to be able to provide in terms of making the argument that, we all know if it's kind of core forest and you're preserving it, it goes hand in hand with carbon sequestration. We're not looking for a calculation. I think it's kind of a little loose at this point because we don't necessarily have that data.
Yeah, and again, looking for more specific or generalized information, I would urge folks to go to the forest subgroup report from the GC3, which does talk about sequestration specifically related to the forest land protection. Again, without obviously getting into the specifics of each particular property.
Right, and that's so just so Amy to point out. So section 10, alignment with, in the application, alignment with state and local conservation and climate goals. One of the bullets we do have is, how does the proposed acquisition support GC3 recommendations? And when we say that, as Amy's saying, it really are focusing on the working and natural lands, those committees. And those committees are, forestry, there's 4, forestry, wetlands, rivers, and agriculture. And
the next question here is, who does the review of the appraisal? And I'm going to lump these together. And then Pete writes again, so about approval of this grant round, he wanted to make sure he heard this correctly, January, February of 23 for the current round.
You mean, when are we going to announce the net? There's 2 questions. When are we going to award these grants? Is that
correct? Yeah.
Correct. So
right.
we're looking towards the beginning of, so it's 2022, right? So within those first, and then what we've been starting to do recently is then announce the next grant round around the same time.
Right. Yep. And who does the review of the appraisal? Who does the appraisal reviews? Is the question here.
Well, my coworker Matt Starr and I, we both just do a cursory review. I can tell many times just from glancing at the original appraisal that it's fine and that there's nothing wrong based on several years of doing this. So if I see red flags, then I might look more to the appraiser and the review, but we just basically now do a cursory review, administrative, maybe a checklist or something.
Thank you. And I didn't see, I'm sorry, Allison, I didn't see that you had so kindly put your answer there in the chat. And also Paul from NCLC has provided us with the link to the TNC resiliency data. It's a good tool to use.
Oh, thanks. Paul.
When you're putting your application together, and has been highly referenced throughout the GC3 process.
Okay,
I think
perfect.
that we are done with questions that I can see in the chat. Again, I encourage folks to continue to ask your questions now rather than wait till the last minute. And if it's easier to funnel them through us to Allison and Nicole, I'm happy to help with that as well. So whatever makes it easier for you to get your questions to them and answered, please look to us for that. And with that, I think that I'd like to segue now to the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. We're scheduled to end this at 2 o'clock. Maria, I did not forget about your very specific detailed question regarding whether a project would be eligible. And I think that's a conversation that we can have privately here with Allison and Nicole at the very, very end, or you can take it offline. But it's important for those people out there that are thinking of, or groups that are thinking of putting an application in, to discuss the application with DEEP as soon as you can, and start to think about the future rounds as you tee up your projects. So with that, I'm going to go back to the main page, and we'll go to the Urban Green and Community Garden application. And so this is the page again, as I had showed earlier, and here is the Urban Green and Community Garden application. And while folks are filtering out, before you filter out, just note that we did put one link in there to the GC3 working group reports, but it's really pretty easy to find them by Googling and going into DEEP's website. But if you have trouble, obviously let us know. Okay, here we are. We're in the Urban Green and Community Garden realm. Take it away.
Well, one of the big with Urban Green and Community Garden, like kind of a threshold, which hasn't changed, is it's really focused on, it has to be a piece of property that's already owned, right? Municipality. So the municipality, and we look for support. It's the lead is the municipality, and then it's sort of a partnership potentially with a landowner. And I raise that because that's the area that, when we asked for comments on this grant round, that was some of the things we asked for feedback, and we do appreciate that was something that, people had said, can we look at more opportunities for acquisition, which again, we sort of are achieving that a little bit when we just talked about the OSWA, like we said, with this emphasis on with equity with EJ. But for right now, Urban Green and Community Garden, the way this is drafted, it really is focused on you already own the property, and it still needs that support. You have to have that letter of support from municipalities. The other thing we had asked about in the public comment was an emphasis on urban forestry, which is that we wanted to beef that up, and that's something that we've done this round as well.
So again, I'm going to encourage folks to put their questions in the chat, but since that is a new area of interest and perhaps can expand the types of applications that or projects that are considered, maybe talk a little bit about that with the urban forestry component here, which is exciting to see that.
Yeah, and I don't think we
included.
Put that much detail, and again, it's still, we've got past grant compliance. We've always had that. Again, this was only just tweaked very minimally, this grant application.
In terms of the urban forestry type of projects, though, is so here I'm just looking. Yeah. So you've got here urban green space or demonstrate. I think that for the folks that contact CLCC about this program, the two main questions are, can my town apply? Can any town apply? And the answer is no, that the towns that are allowed to apply have to be considered distressed or targeted investment communities as set forth in the Connecticut general statutes. So that's one limiting factor right off the bat. They can, a nonprofit alone cannot apply, but as it says here, it can be a co-applicant. But it's the types of projects that are eligible that I think would be helpful to hear about. And again, encourage folks out there to put your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Amy, for saying that. And this is a part that's tricky. I mean, even me being new to the program, and I was trying to understand this myself, that, this bullet, the project must take place on publicly owned land. And if a nonprofit organization is a co-applicant, that's what I'm saying, the land trust, it must have control of the project area for a minimum of 5 years or another term as approved by the commissioner in advance of the application deadline. So control of the project area, I wasn't, we didn't, that's been consistent language. We didn't change that. But if there was an issue with the land trust and you've been working with the municipality and, some other term, please, reach out to us so we can have a conversation about that.
And another question that had been posed to me in the past is if a land trust isn't necessarily, for example, if there's a project that's owned by the city, or if there's a site owned by the city of Bridgeport and they're interested in working with a land trust that isn't in Bridgeport, but actually, its service area is outside of Bridgeport, but they have an interest in partnering or to help with projects within Bridgeport, the fact that the land trust service area isn't technically in Bridgeport, is that an issue? In other words, can any partnering nonprofit work with a municipality?
Yeah, and it also doesn't have to necessarily be a land trust. It should be a nonprofit organization. So yeah, you don't have to be a land trust. There should be some sort of, when they talk about the 5-year agreement, we would like to see some sort of an agreement in place, a management agreement, if you will, that we send along with the PSA. Is what we sign when, the grant agreement gets signed. You need to have some sort of management agreement in place showing that you have a 5-year agreement signed by the municipality and the nonprofit. And I think that's it. You have to be a registered nonprofit though. I did have one issue where somebody wasn't registered and it, came up, but yeah, you have to be registered on the state of Connecticut as a nonprofit agency.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks, that was new to me. Right, so Allison, as reading this, I was confused again too. It's control of the property, right? It has to do with some sort of management agreement or something. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And there was a question that was submitted in advance about the match requirements for the Urban Green Community Garden Program. Can you describe how the funding works and what the matching is?
It's a 50% match. The match funds can also be staff time. It can be donated professional services. It could be volunteer hours. So, I think we put it in there. It's like $24 for professional. I think it might be less per hour, but we get, using staff and volunteer and donated services can be part of the match, or just actual funds on hand that you have for the project. But it's a 50-50 match.
Right, and thank you, Allison. And that was something that came up in the comments that we got as well. I think some people saying that's, is that a deterrent, for some communities allowing, asking for a 50% match. But I think the way we view, just as Allison, and maybe I'd have to look if we have that in the frequently asked question. I think we do answer that. The way we describe how what we count for match, because it's such a difficult.
That actually is, and I would ask, this is about federal match. Can match equal federal grant dollars? If you wouldn't mind explaining that in the context of the Urban Green and Community Garden, but also for the OSWA grant program, for folks that have hung around and are still listening, I think the federal match requirements or limitations would be of interest as well. So for the Urban Green and Community Garden Program, are there federal match dollars used?
I haven't that much experience, honestly. I've only just started working with this program, so I have not yet seen anybody come in with federal match dollars. I've seen construction projects with DAS funding going into it, but nothing federal yet. And the OSWA federal match is much different.
Right. So I think for Urban Green and Community Gardens, as Alice was saying, this program, we've typically, whether it started 10 years ago or something, maybe you only get 2 projects in, per year. So it hasn't been, we don't have that much experience with the federal match. I think that might come up if we start funding like bigger projects. How does the funding work? The state funding? Just so you understand, we don't, set aside a separate pot of money for urban green and community garden. All the funding's available for the open space program, and we've sort of, because we've only gotten in a couple every year, those projects usually have gotten funded as long as they meet the eligibility criteria. But again, as things get more competitive, that all gets factored in.
And I would encourage folks to really stay in touch about the funding questions. There are, a new program that we'll be working with DEEP on the horizon that will combine for the open space grant program, federal funding opportunities, but also just in general, because so much federal funding is expected to come into the state in different forms that could very well be used, be relevant for these programs. We're certainly keeping our finger on that pulse, and I would encourage you to do the same and contact us if you have questions about anything that you're hearing or any possibility, and then we can funnel those questions through to DEEP and the Open Space Review Board as well, to see how we can help to take advantage of any federal funding opportunities that would work with these programs. The next question here says, the Friends of the Garden on the Bridge, a group that is part of the Garden Club of Wyndham, a registered nonprofit, wants to enhance the town park with lighting on the bridge and new benches. We do not have, quote, control over the space, but the Garden Club has been maintaining the garden since they were created in 2007. So should the town apply, the Friends, or a co-sponsored application? That's a great question.
Right. It does sound as if potentially, right, it would be, if the town was willing to, it would be great if the town applied, right, and they'd be co-sponsored. That makes sense.
So
the town must apply. It's just a matter of whether or not the nonprofit is a partner, because the town has to apply as the owner, or the city usually, because they own the property. But the nonprofit can certainly apply as a co-applicant.
Great.
Thanks, Allison. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I think that we've hit all of the questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a minute to get a sense of how many folks are still in the room here. Looks like we've got about 29 people left, including us. So I would encourage everyone to, I'm going to ask my staff to unspotlight Nicole and Allison, and to, if folks would like to unmute themselves, put their hand up and ask a question the remaining minutes, you're welcome. You're welcome to do that. We do have Maria Kane's question that I will now take advantage of this little bit of a lull in questions and go back to that. But meanwhile, with this smaller group left, feel free to ask your questions. Here we go. Here's Maria's question. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and read Maria's here. It's long. So Nicole and Allison, you might want to scroll up in the chat and follow the bouncing ball. Oh, wait, there's another. Let me just see if there's a shorter question here. Oh, thank you, Chris, for coming. Excellent. Glad to see that you're going to work on an application. All right, here we go. Let me go back up to Maria's question that we're all now, I'm creating a lot of suspense around. Okay. The land we want to preserve in the town of Woodbridge is about 149 acres of the old Woodbridge Country Club. Originally, the Woodbridge Conservation Commission got the town to buy the land so the citizens would have a say in any development that could happen on the land. Since the purchase, the town government has entertained a few development proposals, which the citizens have all declined. Recently, a small group has asked them to sell 5 acres of already developed area of the land and purchase a conservation easement to preserve the rest of the land as open space, most likely to use as passive recreation and farming. The need to keep the land as open space has become most important, especially during COVID. Could an application for this proposal qualify for assistance in your program?
It's not municipally owned, right? It can't already be owned by the municipality. I think that's one eligibility criteria.
Yeah, so if the town, Maria, is Maria still here? If she is, she can go ahead and unmute herself and maybe answer some of those questions. And again, if there are we have a few minutes left, so if other questions need to be asked and answered. Oh, we've got somebody just coming in. Please. Maria, are you there?
Technically, yeah. Technically, the municipality can't own the property. Like for this grant round, if September 30th is the due date, can't purchase it before that date. As soon as that date passes, October 1, land trust or municipality can then purchase the property the next day, but not before.
Okay, so again, I'm not sure Maria's still here, but we can pass that answer on. I mean, that seems to be like just at a threshold level that it wouldn't qualify because it's already publicly owned land. Even though it's not protected, it's publicly owned land and wouldn't qualify.
Correct.
Okay, all
They
right.
can't own it up until the application date.
Okay, any other questions out there? Going once, going twice? All right, well, I'm spotlighted, so I just want to make sure there's no hands up. If staff could unspotlight me, then I can just make sure. Oh, now you're spotlighted.
Oh, that's
there.
spotlight me. Yeah, where's that?
Oh, yeah, so if I'll just take a quick peek to see if there's any hands up. If you know, you can take yourself off mute too, so we don't miss you. If you have a question, really speak up. Otherwise, we're going to call it a session and thank you all.
Right, and people are happy to reach out to us,
Mhm.
right, to either me or Allison. We can answer questions.
Yep.
Between now is, you know, because we understand it's the end of September is a deadline. It's human nature. People have been going on vacation or doing different things. Then you really start jamming on the application now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up then and just thank you, Nicole and Allison, so much, not only for being here today, but we know how hard you work in running this program and keeping it going for the land trusts and their communities. It is the most important program that we have for those entities that are seeking to protect land in their communities. And CLCC, it's our main priority in terms of advocacy for funding, and we will continue to fight for funding for this program and to provide the technical assistance that you all need out there to make it run efficiently and effectively for your organization and community. So thank you all so much for coming, and do not hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any further questions and need some help with your applications or vetting certain projects for the future. Have a great day,
Thank you.
everybody.